Chris, or there we go. That's what I was going to ask for. Everyone, my name is Sean Cariff. I'm with the Economic Development Department at the City of San Diego. And Chris Larson and the Development Services Department have put together a very informative PowerPoint presentation and ultimately a webinar that is being recorded to share with all of those interested in getting a permit for Spaces as Places, continuing their outdoor dining operations or starting new outdoor dining operations. I will first just ask that everyone take a note of the platform that we're using, Zoom. I'm sure most of you are familiar with it at this time, but I wanted to point out a few things. The first is that we'll be utilizing the question and answer tool. So please use that throughout. I'll do my best to monitor the Q&A and the chat to let Chris know when it's maybe appropriate to answer some of those questions throughout the presentation. There will be ample time to answer questions throughout the presentation and after. In addition, as I stated, the chat function can be used. So please feel free to utilize that as you see appropriate. Again, we'll be monitoring that. Raising your hand is a great way to let us know that you would like to ask a question directly or provide some comment. Again, I'll be monitoring that. If you're unable to do that, feel free to add in the chat or let me know, or if necessary, go ahead and take yourself off mute. We'll try to avoid that, but if that's the best way for you, we'll go ahead and do our best to accommodate it. In addition, it's not always available, so I want to highlight this in particular. There is the ability to utilize the interpretation function on today's webinar, so please utilize that at the bottom of your screen if that supports you in following today's conversation. With that, again, Sean Cariff from Economic Development, I'll be on, but the lion's share of the information today is coming from Chris Larson with the Development Services Department. So I'll go ahead and turn it over to him. Thanks, Chris.
Thank you, Sean. I really appreciate that. So today we're going to have a webinar about Spaces as Places. I'll start with just the background of how we got where we are. I'll talk about the different menu of options: active sidewalks, dining and private property, promenades, sidewalk cafes. And then I'll get into what I believe most of you are most interested in, and that's the streeteries. We'll discuss the requirements for streeteries, talk about the major changes from temporary outdoor business operations to streeteries. We'll talk about the resources that the city is providing to help plan and design your project. We'll talk about a deadline to make application for these Spaces, Places permits to replace your temporary outdoor operations of July 13th. We'll talk about the required submittal documents for the review. We'll talk about the online application process, and then I'll talk about some available assistance that we have for you. So just to remind you, we went through COVID, and as a part of COVID, you had limited occupancy of your commercial business. You had 6 feet of separation. So the city, state, had these requirements on you, and we thought, what can we do to make things easier for you? We instituted some temporary ordinances which allowed for your business to expand outdoors into parking lots, into other areas. We went to city council multiple times, had the city council adopt these ordinances, but the unfortunate portion of this, they expired July 13th, 2022. So we need to have a solution to move forward. So the examples of what we did for temporary outdoor business operations, which several of you might be using, were expanded sidewalk cafes using the sidewalk in more areas than you normally would. We did what we called pedestrian plazas, which they were calling streeteries, which was the use of the street parking lane for eating and drinking purposes. We did outdoor dining on private property. We allowed private parking lots to be, we allowed business to make a business decision, use your parking lot for your restaurant or use it for parking. We also did several street closures throughout the city. So as I mentioned, the temporary outdoor business operations were first adopted spring 2020. We extended it again summer of 2021. And then in the fall of 2021, permanent regulations were adopted. And that's the Spaces as Places program that we're going to discuss in detail. As a part of the Spaces as Places adoption, there were a variety of city departments that were involved in the vetting of the rules and regulations and the use of the right of way. There was a lot of public outreach that the planning department did for the adoption of these regulations. They tried to solicit as much support as they could and as much as input as they could to figure out the best way to move these regulations forward. That all started in June 2021. The public hearing process started in the summer of 2021, and then fall of 2021, the city council adopted these regulations. So the purposes of spaces as places is to activate streets in a thriving public manner, facilitate the creation of wider sidewalks, allow for a variety of uses, including outdoor dining, allow for more pedestrian and bike-friendly streets, and ensure compatibility with surrounding land uses. So these are the menus of options that come with spaces as places. Streeteries. This is the replacement of the decks or platforms in the street parking lane. Active sidewalks is an option to expand a sidewalk. Outdoor dining on private property is the use of the parking lot instead of for parking, for dining. And then a promenade is to allow for a permanent street closure. So an active sidewalk, which is the extension of the sidewalk into the street parking lane, basically widening a sidewalk, which can then later be allow for expanded sidewalk cafes or other uses. A right-of-way permit is required to do that. If a business wants to expand into the private parking lane, a building permit is required to do that. That building permit is necessary to review for accessibility, and also something to keep in mind: if you expand outdoors with your business, there may be health department consequences, the need for additional restrooms. And I do want to mention that the option of expanding to the private parking lot is best achieved within the transit priority area. In those instances, all the parking spaces can be replaced. Outside the transit priority area, only excess parking spaces can be replaced with outdoor dining. The promenade option is something that we will probably see on Fifth Avenue in the next few years. We have also always had a sidewalk cafe option. Sidewalk cafes are the tables and chairs on the sidewalk, sometimes enclosed by a railing, sometimes not. We've always had this option available, and it continues to be as an option available for outdoor dining. So I want to talk specifically about streeteries. So streeteries are outdoor spaces created in areas that were formerly dedicated to parking spaces, and they're only for eating and drinking establishments. So typically a streetery is going to be a platform or deck in the street parking lane. Sometimes people call them a parklet, sometimes people call them a pedestrian plaza. There are locational requirements for streeteries. They need to be located along curbs with on-street parking. They're allowed within yellow curbs, green curbs, unpainted curbs, but they also need to be 20 feet from the intersection curb point of return. The curb point of return is where the sidewalk and curb become straight from the curvature that you see where the intersection occurs. Streeters also need to be on streets with a speed limit less than 30 miles per hour. They're not allowed along a major street or greater, and those are defined in many of the community plans within the city. They're not allowed on red, blue, or white curbs. They're not allowed within an alley. They're not allowed within an existing or planned bike lane. They're also not allowed within a bus lane, within a bus stop, and as I said earlier, existing or planned bike facility. This is very important because during TOBO, we did make lots of allowances to allow for temporary outdoor business operations to impact bike lanes. Bike lanes were rerouted. Bike lanes were not installed that were planned. But as places move forward, these bike lanes need to be respected. They're not allowed within 10 feet of a storm drain inlet or clean out. They're not allowed within 5-foot radius of a fire hydrant. They're not allowed to encroach over utility access panels, covers, handholds, transformers, water meters, water valves. They need to be designed to maintain a 5 feet clear path of travel on the sidewalk. Platforms need to be even with the sidewalk. You're not allowed to have any overhead structures, and areas near intersections need to be kept clear of structures. Sight lines need to be maintained for emergency access. There's also a requirement for an 8x6 clear gutter along the length of the streetery to allow for stormwater to move. So a streetery requires a public right-of-way permit. It also requires encroachment maintenance removal agreement. These permits are only valid for 2 years. There's a limited operational hours within 100 feet of a residential use. There's restrictions on live entertainment. The outdoor streetery must comply with permitted noise levels for the area, and also no smoking or vaping is allowed within the streeteries. This picture shows an example of fire safety and emergency access. The streeteries are only allowed to be 20 feet wide, and they need to have 3 feet of space to allow for emergency access. So business could have multiple streeteries, they just would have to break them up to allow for 3 feet of access every 20 feet. This is an example of what is permitted. No overhead structures. It maintains sight lines. The structures are only 42 inches tall, and there's no heaters underneath umbrellas. And when I speak about no overhead structures, there are allowances for umbrellas. This is showing a site that has no overhead structure. This is no longer allowed with streeteries. It wasn't allowed through TOBO either, but we didn't actually get in the details of what we were permitting through the temporary outdoor business. We just gave approval of space for businesses to use. And then the option of what was constructed there wasn't really regulated by the city, but we do have issues with structures, with roofs. This is an example of accessibility being done right. The platform is even with the sidewalk, so that a wheelchair can easily, or others can easily just walk onto the platform. This shows how stormwater compliance is supposed to occur. Platforms even with a sidewalk, and respects an 8 foot by 6 inch clear gutter to allow stormwater to run adjacent to the curb. I want to talk about the major changes for streeteries that are different from what you may have been used to with temporary outdoor business operations. There's insurance requirements that are different. The encroachment agreement and responsibility is different. Locational criteria has changed. There are different design requirements. The fees are different, and only eating and drinking establishments are allowed to use streeteries, and the permits are valid for 2 years. So the insurance changes are, there's multiple different types of insurance that are required. You're required to have commercial general liability insurance, umbrella insurance, workers' compensation insurance, and also the city needs to be an additional assured to the commercial general liability and umbrella. One of the major changes that might be different for you from the temporary outdoor business operation is that with the temporary outdoor business operation, we allowed you as a business owner to sign for the encroachment agreement. Now moving forward, we're requiring the property owner to sign that encroachment agreement. I do want to make you aware that we've always required property owners to sign encroachment agreements. If you currently have a sidewalk cafe, tables and chairs on the sidewalk with the railing that you had prior to COVID, the property owner signed that agreement. And the requirements for the encroachment agreement are very similar for a sidewalk cafe as they are for a streetery. So it shouldn't be something new to property owners that they need to take responsibility for encroachments in front of their property. I also do want to mention that it is okay to expand a streetery in front of adjacent properties, but an encroachment agreement is required from each adjacent property. And by property, I mean the owner. So the locational criteria, I kind of went through some of this earlier. There's separation requirements from poles and equipment. There are requirements to stay 20 feet from the curb point of return. You have to respect bike lanes, whereas we didn't necessarily do that during temporary outdoor business. And sloped streets are going to need to break their platforms into multiple levels. There needs to be access to a platform every 10 feet. And so a sloping street would require or necessitate multiple platforms so that access can occur every 10 feet. And that access needs to be at the curb, at the sidewalk, at the same level. So design requirements that are different. You are going to need to hire a design professional to be responsible for the platform that gets permitted as a streetery for spaces places. Typically, that's an architect or an engineer. You also are going to need to hire a contractor to obtain the permit and be responsible for the construction. Now, I'm not saying that you need to build a new platform for this process. What you built during temporary outdoor business may be allowable, may comply with all the streetery requirements. It may not. It may need to be modified. It may need to be reduced in size or length, and you need to have a contractor be responsible for all portions of that. I want to reiterate again that no roof structures are allowed for streeteries. Umbrellas are okay though. No electrical. There shouldn't be electrical wiring crossing the sidewalk at grade, above grade, over the pedestrians' heads as they walk along the sidewalk. There shouldn't be any electrical running from the storefront to the streetery. It is okay to have solar lighting. We do have allowance to allow for small poles or balusters to support lighting within the streetery. But there shouldn't be any electrical wiring related to that comes from the storefront crossing the sidewalk. There's also requirements for ADA access that we didn't necessarily get into the details of through temporary outdoor business. And you also should be aware if you're located within a historic district or a planned district. A planned district is a certain zoning area. There may be design requirements that require your platform to be designed in certain ways. You may need to have metal railings instead of wood. There are requirements like that that may impact your design based on location. So there are fees that were part of obtaining a streetery permit. Many of you that went through temporary outdoor business operations didn't pay fees to obtain your traffic control permit for your temporary outdoor business operation. We had funds allocated by the city council to pay for development services and plan check and inspection process. Well, now you will need to pay fees for these processes. Development services is an enterprise fund. We're not funded by general tax dollars. We're funded by user fees. So in order to provide the services we do charge for a plan check, and then we charge for inspection. And then there are additional fees that are being required of streeteries. The businesses are required to pay 1/15 of the standard development impact fee for a building of the similar size. There's also a per square foot fee of $10, $20, or $30, depending on location within a climate equity map. In general speaking, most of downtown is within the $20 range. That kind of gives you an idea to compare your location to the in the city to what downtown might go through. The climate equity map is based on density and it's based on access to transit. I do want to make sure you're aware though that these fees are doubled because these are 2-year permits and you'll need to pay for the fees per square foot up front. So the 10, 20, 30 per square feet actually becomes 20, 40, and 60. So this exclusive use fee, the 10, 20, or 30 that I mentioned, is a fee for your exclusive use of the right-of-way. Those fees don't need to be collected if you're going to make your streetery open to the public during non-operational hours. The fees are designed to be full cost recovery to allow enforcement and administration of the city's Places program. At least 50% of the remaining funds will be used to support outdoor dining areas within traditionally underserved neighborhoods. And the remaining revenue will go towards citywide public right-of-way improvements. This is an example of what fees a business may pay. So in this example, the streetery is 20 feet wide, 20 feet long by 6.5 feet wide for a total of 170 square feet. The average inspection and permitting fees, this is the plan check and inspection fee for development services, is $3,500. The exclusive use fee, depending on location on that climate equity map that I mentioned earlier, is either $3,400, $6,800, or $10,200, depending on location. And then the prorated development impact fee could potentially be around $200. So these streetery right-of-way permits are valid for 2 years. They're renewable every 2 years. Basically, you would then need to apply for a permit again through the same process. And the purpose for that is so that the city can ensure that you're properly maintaining your platform, that you haven't made any changes that aren't consistent with the requirements 42 inches tall, no electrical, no roof structures. And these platforms are only for eating and drinking establishments. You may not have been aware of it, but we allowed any type of commercial serving business to utilize outdoor areas in their temporary outdoor business operations, temporary COVID ordinances, but now moving forward, only in eating and drinking establishments are eligible. So I want to make you aware of information that we've published that will make it easy for you. I asked Sean to put a variety of links in the chat that hopefully you can utilize, maybe go in there right now, copy and paste, that you can use them later. But this first one I want to talk about is the most important item for you if you want to do a streetery. The streetery is the platform in the street parking lane. We've created a checklist. And the best thing for you to do is take this checklist, compare it to the platform you've already constructed to determine what changes or modifications you may need to make to it. There are 100 or so items on this checklist that you can go through and verify for yourself and decide what you need to do moving forward. If you want to move forward, what changes you have to make, and make determinations related to that. But I want to say it again, this is probably the most important document you can look at to decide what you want to do. We also have a web page that we've created, sandiego.gov/spaces-places, that says all the information, has all the items that were placed into the chat by Sean. Will be here. You can find here. You may have to drill down into individual items to find information, but it's all very helpful things for you. There is a design manual to help you with your design. Even if you have an existing platform, you need to modify it. This might help you make decisions. There is an information bulletin that basically has very similar information to the web page, but is in more of a PDF format. And we also have a guide to how to apply online. And a right-of-way permit is what we consider to be an engineering permit. And so this user guide for how to apply for a permit online will be very helpful to you. You're required, as all permits that Development Services now processes, to apply online. And this will talk you through the steps. And I also will go through the steps later in this presentation. So I want to let you know about things now and ongoing. We are currently accepting applications for spaces, places, right-of-way permits. We're hoping you've already applied or you're thinking about applying soon. We are also accepting applications for traffic control permits because if you have a temporary outdoor business operation and you're deciding to abandon your temporary outdoor business operation, you want to clean it up, remove it, you need to obtain a traffic control permit so the city can come out and inspect to make sure that what you did in the right-of-way the last couple of years didn't damage the sidewalk or street. Code enforcement is actively occurring for temporary outdoor business operation locations to resolve fire marshal identified issues, primarily the roof structures. Code enforcement's asked for those roof structures to be removed. They're actually taking people forward to civil penalty notice hearings. So things are actually occurring related to that. And also there are times when the temporary outdoor business operations have conflicted with capital improvement projects, utility projects, 5G projects, and the temporary outdoor business operations need to be removed, either temporary or permanently, to allow for the installation or construction to occur for these types of things. In May, I sent a letter to all TOBO permitted locations. And in that letter, it gave notice that the option is there to apply for spaces, places permit to replace temporary outdoor business operation. It recommended that you start the process by July 13th. The letter also serves as and functions as a 45-day notice of the need to remove the temporary outdoor business operation. And then the letter also made businesses aware their traffic control permit is required to demonstrate that the area has been returned to the original condition. In June, just a week or so ago, I sent out another letter. This letter indicates very similar things. Spaces, places available, feel free to apply for that permit. The letter gave notice to start that process or remove by July 13th. And that letter also functions as a 30-day notice to remove temporary outdoor business operations. So come July 13th, the ordinance to allow for temporary outdoor business operations is expired. You're going to need to remove your temporary outdoor business application or apply for a spaces as places replacement permit. It's the city's intention to allow the temporary outdoor business operations to remain in place while an application is being processed for a replacement spaces as places permit. As a part of this, we're going to trust that you will work diligently in a good faith effort to obtain the spaces as places permit as quickly as possible. Those businesses that don't want to continue with temporary outdoor business operations and convert to spaces as places need to obtain the traffic control permit by July 13th so that they can demonstrate that the site has been returned to its original condition. And then after July 13th, code enforcement can begin on temporary outdoor business operations that have not applied for a replacement spaces places permit or the traffic control permit that I mentioned. So I want to make you aware of some timing that hasn't been determined. If you're in the coastal areas of the city, you may or may not be aware that the city's land use regulations have to be approved or certified by the Coastal Commission prior to the city being able to use those regulations. The Coastal Commission has not approved the regulations for spaces as places yet in the coastal areas of the city. We don't know when that will occur. City staff is currently discussing with Coastal Commission staff the best way or how to modify the regulations. There may be a requirement for a coastal development permit for a spaces places project in the coastal area. It may be different requirements based on how close the site is to the beach, whether or not it's within the first public roadway, whether or not it's within an appealable area. And it could be that the Coastal Commission doesn't allow for spaces as places within the coastal area as well. So after July 13th, code enforcement for tobo sites that have not obtained a traffic control permit, as I mentioned, can begin. But the key is the plan is to allow temporary outdoor businesses to remain in place as long as you're moving forward in a good faith, diligent effort to obtain the replacement spaces as places permit. And the areas within the coastal zone do have the issues that I mentioned. And please keep in mind that you may have to modify your tobo for capital improvement projects.
Chris, can I jump in? We had an
Yes.
anonymous question. Does removing the tobo include use of private parking lots?
Yes. Yes. The allowance for outdoor dining, as we've allowed through tobo, ends July 13th in the right of way and on private property. If you want to continue to use your parking lot for eating and drink establishments, you need to obtain a building permit. And you should apply for that building permit prior to July 13th so that you can maintain your tobo if that's what you want to do. I do want to mention, though, that the traffic control permit I spoke about is only for right-of-way locations. It's not for the private property. If you damaged your walkways, your asphalt, that's between you and yourself or the property owner if there's a different property owner. So I want to reiterate about the traffic control permit. It's required if you do not want to continue with outdoor operations in the right of way. I also want to mention that it will be required at some point for spaces, places, right of way permits as well. You will obtain a traffic control permit after you obtain your spaces, places, right of way permit and prior to starting construction or modifications of whatever you have out there. These are the recommended steps for a streetery. So the recommendation is to leave your tobo as is, except if you have a roof structure, electrical wires, you need to remove those now. You should compare your tobo to the streetery checklist. You should hire a design professional or engineer. You should apply for that right-of-way permit by July 13th, 2022. There may be changes, there may be additional documents you need to upload, and you need to resubmit as required in a timely manner. Eventually, you'll get an invoice that you'll need to pay to allow for the plan check process to occur. Once you pay that invoice, plan check process will occur. There may be changes that are asked to be made to the plans at this time as well, and you'll need to resubmit as needed multiple times potentially to make sure the plans show compliance with the new spaces, places regulations. Then you'll need to pay for the permit. You'll get another invoice that you'll need to pay. After you pay, the permit will be issued. Once the permit is issued, you can download the approved construction plans. And then you'll obtain a traffic control permit, which will allow you to be in the right of way doing the work. They'll then need to have a pre-construction meeting with the city resident engineer inspector. We call them an RE. You'll then need to modify your tobo or construct a new platform. You'll continue with inspections by the city RE, and eventually you'll have final approval by the city resident engineer. These are the submittal documents to obtain the permit that I'm going to go through with you now. You'll need to provide
sorry to interrupt.
Yes.
We're getting a lot of questions. I thought maybe now might be a good spot in your presentation to go back to some of these before we go into detail. The first one, and anyone who has provided these questions, feel free to take yourself off mute or raise your hand if you'd like to expand on them. Just one moment. We had a question, is the contractor has to be licensed Class A?
No. Class A contractor is not required. A general contractor can do this type of work.
Excellent. We've also had a question regarding referrals. Any referrals as for architect contractors?
And unfortunately, it's not appropriate for the city to make a recommendation of who to hire. You know, if you're within a business improvement district, maybe your business improvement district can give information. Maybe there's one that can help there, but it's not really, you know, they might be a member of the group or maybe your professional association, but it's not appropriate for us as a city to give particular recommendations. We can't be liable or responsible for who you hire. Plus, we may not know who the best person to do the work is. Sorry about that.
And this question may not be directly for Chris. We have a number of experts from the city, various departments on the line. So if anyone from fire is on the line, this one might be for you. What about adding tenting options during winter? Are patio heaters okay?
Well, I can answer that question. Patio heaters are okay. They should not be under tents. They should be not under umbrellas. That's not something that our city is comfortable with, and there shouldn't be tents used during the winter. It only should be umbrellas.
Okay, we have, and anyone from fire have anything to add on that?
This is the fire marshal, Tony Tosca. I think Chris said it very well, but when it comes to the weather considerations, there's upwind draft protection, things like that become a concern. So he captured it well.
Excellent, thank you. We have a couple questions about coastal zone, so I'll read them both. If you're in the coastal zone, you might not be able to even have a streetery. How do we start the application process? And the second question, very similar. What if you have a client in the coastal zone now and are resubmitting? Will it go through? And what happens if coastal then decides it's not allowed or CDP is required?
So it's our intention to accept applications in the coastal areas for spaces, places, related permits. We will review them to the regulations as adopted. We'll get as close to permit issuance as we can. We just will not be able to issue those permits until we get authority from the Coastal Commission to do that. And as part of that authority, there may be requirements to change things. There may be requirements to obtain other permits. We don't know that at this instance, but we are willing and able to go through the permit process now. And I think it's a good idea to apply for permits now.
Excellent. We have a few more if you'll indulge us. Do you need to apply for a traffic control permit to remove the overhead of your tobo?
So if you can remove the overhead for the tobo completely within the platform without blocking street traffic or blocking the sidewalk, no. You do not need a traffic control permit to do that.
Here's another one, and we're quickly moving through them. If property owner changes after the first property owner has signed the approval, will the city require the new property owner to sign off?
Yes, the encroachment agreements are recorded against the title of the property, and only the existing property owner has the authority to have that document recorded against their title. And I do want to mention, as a part of this, though, that item being recorded against the title would be an encumbrance for all future owners. But we can't record a document that is signed by someone who doesn't own the property.
Okay, maybe we'll do one more and then I'll defer to you, Chris, if you wanted to go into the details or continue with questions. This other one is, you mentioned that permits would not be approved for streets with planned bike lanes. Does this apply to platforms that are already existing in bike lanes that have already been built? Thinking of the dozens along 30th Street and North Park that block the current bike lane.
The platforms on 30th Street need to be removed so that the bike lane can get installed as originally intended.
Chris, would you like to go back to the presentation or continue with questions?
I'm not sure how many we have. What I have left in my presentation is the submittal documents, and then a explanation of the online permitting process. So
We probably have about 5 or 6 additional questions.
okay, let's do those questions, then we can continue. And then we'll have more time for additional questions at the end.
Thanks, Chris. Is there a possibility to replace white and blue curbs? Does the design professional need to provide site and floor plan or any other construction details documentation?
So there are opportunities to replace curbs. The city operations regularly makes modifications to curbs colors. And so that's a request that could be made. More than likely, they would need to be relocated to an area close in the vicinity, but that is something that can occur. But the way that should occur is that the sidewalk paint be changed by city forces, and then you utilize whatever is there after that change is made. So there is a process to request changes to city curbs, and I can put that information in the chat later about how you make that request to make a change, and then that gets decided by city staff to determine if it's appropriate to make that change. That's done by folks outside, city employees outside the development services department that deal with operations and traffic.
Great. And
Your second question about the site plan. So it depends on what permit you're submitting for. If it's just for a streetery, all we need is the information on the construction plan, which is the document that's on the screen right now. And you're going to show the street, you're going to show the streetery, you're going to show the sidewalk. You're not going to show the interior of the business if that's what you're asking. Now, if you're talking about a building permit to use a private parking lot, yes, you would need to provide details about the interior of the building in order for us to determine appropriate access to that outdoor space.
And for those more detailed questions, how might they be able to ask those questions before submitting? Would that be the
So I
right
have a slide at the end, and we also put some information in the chat about people to contact.
Excellent. So we'll get there in a minute. After the permit has been issued, how soon should an inspection be scheduled?
Well, so you're going to get a right-of-way permit for the streetery. You then need to obtain a traffic control permit to allow for the construction work to occur. And then you should schedule the construction, the pre-construction inspection. That should occur as quickly as you and the inspector can work out a time for that to occur.
Okay, here's a clarification question. You're requesting a 6x8 clear space at the curb. Most curbs are 6 inches tall and the deck needs to extend to the curb. With the deck materials, I don't think the 6x8 space can be achieved with a 6-inch curb.
So during plan review, we will work with applicants to maybe expand the 8 inches to be larger. We do recognize that some curbs have had asphalt placed over the years and may have been reduced to 4 inches. So we will work with applicants to come up with a solution that provides an equal amount of ability for runoff to still be conveyed in the similar size.
Okay, thanks for powering through with us, Chris. This other one, are you saying only a licensed contractor can do the work, or can an owner do the work? Is it same for the designer or architect?
So A licensed contractor needs to do the work in the right of way. It's not something that a owner can do,
Okay,
a business owner. And for obtaining the permit, it is, if an architect also runs a restaurant, then that architect more than likely can draw the plans and get the permit. I don't envision a business owner being capable of providing the information on the plans that are necessary in designing a project that complies with the regulations. I just want you as a business owner to get comfortable with, you need to hire a design professional to do this work for you. That's just part of obtaining permits, is you have someone draw the plans for you, and that needs to occur.
okay, maybe we'll do a couple more. This one's for the fire department. Are propane tanks allowed to be stored in alleyways?
Chris, I'll take that. Fire Marshal Tony Tosca. So this can be kind of there's no one size fits all to this question, because the best thing to do is have a deputy fire marshal that comes out and inspects your property, or you can make a request to have an inspection, because it depends on the size of the tank. Is it in a storage cage? Alleyways are not really fire access roadways by designation, but you don't want to store it within 5 feet of one exit, or 10 feet two, or you don't want to, if there is a staircase or something to that effect. So best to have a deputy fire marshal come out and make a request through our website, our community risk reduction and San Diego Fire Department website.
Okay, I'm going to suggest, thank you for that, I appreciate it. I'm going to suggest that we move through the remaining slides, and then we'll come back to that same spot and continue with the questions with the remaining.
Right. So on the screen, I'm showing submittal requirement. It's the construction plan. We have a specific template for streeteries. You should utilize this. There should be a link in the chat to how you can find this document. There is a stormwater requirements applicability checklist. All permitting that Development Services does requires this. It's a bunch of questions that need to be answered, and it tells you how you need to provide information related to stormwater for the construction of your project. There's also the streetery encroachment maintenance removal agreement that, once again, I mentioned needs to be signed by the property owner instead of the business owner. And now I'm going to go through the requirements or the steps to apply for a permit online. So the first thing you do is you log on to Acela. It's the system that Development Services uses for permit processing. You can get there through the Development Services webpage, Spaces Places. You click on Apply for Permit. You get here. You need to have a login. You need to have a username and a password. You need to select DSD permits once you've logged on. You need to select Create an Application, because you're making a new application for the streetery right-of-way permit. You need to read a disclaimer. You need to agree to it and click Continue Application. You need to choose what permit type you're making application for. This lists all the permits that Development Services has in Acela. And this next slide zooms in a little more. You're going to choose Grading Right-of-Way Mapping Standalone, because you're doing a right-of-way permit that's just by itself. This next question will pop up. We'll ask you, is it related to any other action? Is there anything else associated with it? There shouldn't be for a streetery. It should be standalone. Projects that have grading right-of-way and mapping that are associated with them usually are more subdivisions or full-blown construction of entire site. So then you answer a question whether or not you have an address, which you should. Then you put in your address. I will advise you to use this address more as a search versus being specific. Put in a few numbers, few letters, see what pops up, and go from there. Sometimes how you think the street should be written may not be how the system thinks it should be written. You're then going to need to answer questions about whether or not you have a code enforcement case. You then will need to input information about your project. You'll input your project scope. You'll choose a processing timeline. You either have a choice between standard, expedite, or express. Standard is a regular permit process. Expedite is only certain areas of the city in the promise zone, which is roughly southeastern San Diego, are allowed to do expedite. And then express is an option for you to pay for city staff to review your project on overtime. It is the quickest way to get through the system. You're then going to have to validate again what permit you're applying for: right-of-way permit, You'll then need to upload the required documents. We just talked about what the documents were. There aren't that many of them. There's the construction plan, there is the stormwater form, and there is the encroachment agreement. Have an option to upload any additional information you may want to upload. You can then choose file to get more details about what you're doing, continue your application. You then can review your application. And then you again, you acknowledge at the end, once again, final certification, you hit continue application, and then you've submitted. And then the ball's in the city's court for the city's portion of the process. Our permit processes are always a partnership with you providing good information to us and us providing a thorough plan review for you. And then same with construction and inspection. You'll then receive an email saying you're in the system. You'll have a PRJ number. That PRJ number is the basically how we track what your project is. So I want to let you know a little about the timelines. Currently, it's 12 working days for completeness check. This changes depending on the number of applications we receive. If all 500 TOBOs that were issued as a part of the temporary allowances come in, this 12 days will increase. The first review for standard review is 20 working days. You'll then need to make changes potentially to your plans. If there's a second review, it's 11 working days. And then once the project's ready for issuance, it's currently 12 working days for issuance, but like I mentioned earlier, that can change. There's the express option that I mentioned that cuts down on the the first review and second review timeframes, doesn't impact the completeness check, doesn't impact the issuance. And like I said, the express option would be 150% of your plan check fee. So it does increase a little bit. And things to keep in mind, your applicant, your designer's response time, that can impact how quickly you get through this permit process. We give you information, we need you to submit in a diligent manner. So resources available. This is City's Economic Development Department. And Sean, I thank you for this. They're available by email to answer questions. We also in the Development Services Department have a small business and restaurant assistance team. Any size restaurant is eligible to participate in this program. Small businesses are limited to the number of employees, but you can go to the Development Services webpage. You can click on Small Business Restaurant Assistance Team, and you can request an online virtual appointment where we have staff that's available to help you and explain the process to you so that you know what you need to do and know what you need to do moving forward. Maybe answer questions while you're going through the process as well. So brings me to the end of the presentation, Sean, and we can continue with the questions.
Excellent. Thank you so much. Sorry, when you stopped sharing your screen, my chat changed, so I need to go find it again. Just one moment, please. Here we go. For private property locations, can tents be used on a temporary basis? Weekend, month, we have used tents prior to COVID for winter months.
So I don't know if you want to answer that question, Chief.
Yeah, so they can be used on private property, but if they're going to go over the 400 square foot, they're going to need that permit. But if you're going to do that, it's 180 time temporary permit that'll be issued. So just make note of the time you want to use it. If you want to have it the covering during the winter time, you probably won't be reissued a permit because of space in the other months that you might not want it. So just make sure that you're using it wisely.
Thank you. Appreciate that, Chief. Can a sidewalk cafe extend in front of an adjacent property with the owner's permission?
Yes. Yes, the encroachment maintenance removal agreement is required from that other property owner though. So they're going to have to sign, have it recorded against their title as well.
And would you mind clarifying for everyone on here the distinction between a sidewalk cafe, Tobo, and spaces, places, just because in one of the future questions.
Okay, so Tobo was a temporary outdoor business operations. This is what we allowed through COVID. All these things popped up. That was what we call Tobo. Sidewalk cafes are tables and chairs on the sidewalk. It's been something that's been permitted for a number of years within the city. Many times there's a railing around it. That's a sidewalk cafe. And it's on the sidewalk. Streetery is in the street parking lane. Typically, it's a platform where a parking space previously was located.
Very good. For purposes of splitting the streetery every 20 feet, does the platform have to be removed so that the curb returns?
So it needs to provide similar access to access that was provided prior to installation of it. So yes, the fire department needs to be able to get, or police department needs to be able to continue on the asphalt up the sidewalk.
Okay, does the whole streetery need to be ADA accessible or just certain amounts of seats?
So the streetery needs to be accessible. There needs to be an access point from the sidewalk, and then that there needs to be access for a wheelchair or someone throughout the streetery. I don't know if that answers the question well enough. I'd be happy to have an additional ADA conversation. I do want to mention to, I don't know who's asking the question, but when we review for building permits, we get into the number of tables and chairs. We don't necessarily have that same review process as a part of the streeteries. There are requirements in the San Diego Municipal Code about the number of tables and chairs that need to be accessible, and maybe the details of that are what needs to be reviewed. The ordinance does require a certain amount of accessibility.
And Thomas, if you have additional questions, please feel free to send it to that email address. We'll do the best to get that answered if it wasn't. Brad asks, I have already submitted a right-of-way minor rapid review DS 3179 and have a P sidewalk cafe and streetery on the same project. Am I okay with that?
So we're not processing these necessarily through rapid review. It is a submitted review. So maybe the change, maybe we need to talk about that further, but that can be switched. Maybe if we know the PRJ number, we can help you with that. It depends on what kind of sidewalk cafe you're applying for, whether or not it can be permitted with the streetery. If sidewalk cafes, depending on how they're designed, if they're adjacent to the building and they function as a part of the user space of the building, then a building permit's required, and you can't process a building permit and a right-of-way permit as part of the same project. Now, but if you're doing a sidewalk cafe that is on the opposite side of the sidewalk from the business, and the pedestrians would walk and basically bifurcate, kind of how they would with a streetery, then potentially that could be connected into one right-of-way project.
Okay, Derek, I'm not sure if we got your question answered, so I'll go ahead and let Chris respond as well. Do the platforms that were built per California Building Code and per your site need to be removed completely and then rebuilt? Different location as other questions.
So no, platforms do not need to be removed and rebuilt. That might be what needs to happen, but they don't have to be. They might need to be modified, or they might be okay, but there's no requirement to remove them and rebuild them unless necessitated by not complying with these new regulations. Hopefully the existing platforms are out there on a case-by-case basis can just be modified. Maybe they just need to be reduced in size. Maybe they just need to be reduced in height. That's what we're hoping for, but it's case by case whether or not that would need to occur.
Okay, we're down to the final minutes. So we're going to do a rapid fire here. If you've already started the application process but selected the wrong right-of-way permit, how can that be changed?
You should start over.
We're going to submit for a promenade. Do we also have to make a streetery permit application as well?
So I don't know where you're doing the promenade. I think we should have that discussion. I've been in contact with members of the Gas Lamp and members of Avenida de la Playa. If this is another location, I think we should have a specific conversation about how you're planning to do the promenade, and because there might be some items related to that.
Yeah.
So I'd be happy to discuss that with you more.
Great. So Mark, go ahead and reach out to us if you'd like to set that up. Regarding the development impact fee, it is 1/15 the cost of what?
So there are links. Well, so the city collects money to build new construction, and that pays for the fair share of police facilities, fire facilities, park facilities. And so those fees are per community. And so there, are 60 communities in the city. So it's not necessarily easy for me to give a specific answer to what it costs. So there's a per square foot development impact fee per community. And so whatever that per square foot fee would be, the requirement for a streetery is to pay 1/15 of what per square foot fee would be. In the example I showed on the screen, it's an area in downtown. It was approximately $200 is what their fee would be. The more urban the area is, I will say, the less those fees are. The more suburban an area is, the higher the fees get. That's a general thing I will pass along.
What are the fee amounts for a plan check and inspection?
So I did have that on the slide, and I believe it's approximately $3,500 for that. Looking about $2,500 to plan check and $1,000 to inspect, roughly.
Is a railing required for a sidewalk cafe?
A railing is not required for a sidewalk cafe. Prior to COVID, typically railings were required as a part of the alcohol beverage control permitting, because they want a railing to make it clear as to where alcohol can be served and where it cannot be served. I do know the ABC's temporary regulations are still going, and so maybe that railing isn't as important now, but I recommend businesses think about the future, what happens after COVID. Maybe a railing will be still needed. I'm not sure.
So the next question is just, I want to acknowledge that we're moving really fast, and they'd like to see those initial steps in the streetery right-of-way permit application. Is there somewhere where that's documented that we can point them to?
So there is a user guide for how to apply. Sean, you put that in the chat, I believe. So that is there, and that can be utilized. It's a user guide, how to apply for an engineering permit online.
Excellent. Who should I email to help with my PRJ?
So it depends on what status you're in. You could make an appointment with the Small Business Restaurant Assistance Team, and they can tell you about where your status is and what's going on. There is a different work group, however, that actually processes and reviews it. The Small Business Restaurant Assistance Team is really there for customer service and answer your general questions, and kind of let you know where you are in the system. They have the ability to dig into it and see where it is and what's going on.
Okay, we have just a few more and just a couple more minutes. If a fee is paid to the city and the Coastal Commission does not approve, will the fee be returned?
So we do charge for our plan check fees, and if we provide a service, we do not refund fees.
I'm in a private parking lot taking up 2 spaces with no roof and movable tables. Structure is, not sure if that was intended. Structure is not solid and no roof. I'm still confused on what permit to apply for.
So if you're in a private parking lot, you need a building permit to convert those parking spaces on a permanent basis to eating and drinking purposes.
How do I get a quick answer on if my street will even allow it based on traffic and speed?
Well, so speed limit hopefully is posted. Generally, the number of lanes on a street kind of lets you know if it's a major street or not. You start getting into 2 lanes in each direction, you might have that concern, but if it's just 1 lane each direction and the speed limit is within under 30, more than likely it's okay.
Okay, well, we have a few more questions that we did not get to. It is 11 o'clock. I want to encourage everyone that had a question that we didn't get to please submit those questions back through the sdbusiness@sandiego.gov email address, and we'll be sure to get those answered for you. And I'd like to thank Chris and allow him to sign us off.
All right. Well, thank you, everyone. We will have this this webinar posted by tomorrow afternoon online. So if you want to go back and review the steps, but I do think you should go to the chat. Sean put in a bunch of links that will be helpful for you. Take advantage of those and follow up through the email address or the Small Business Restaurant Assistance Team. That way we can help you with additional questions that you might have. So thank you, everyone, for your time.